Hello, welcome, Cabbage here. In this video, I want to look back at all of the Final Fantasies and then put this on this tier list. This was a video that I wanted to make for a while. I especially wanted to do it before the global release of War of the Visions. But it just didn't really strike me until I saw Maximilian Dude use this to rank the Dark Souls games. And I thought, oh, that's easy. I can use that to rank the Final Fantasies. The other day I made a Final Fantasy VII Remake video, and that actually kind of grew out of my desire to make this Final Fantasy tier list video. But with the release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I thought that would be a good chance to sort of focus on that video, because I had a lot to say about that game. There were controversial opinions in that video, and there will be more controversial opinions here, so you've been warned. But I have my tiers here on the left. Perfect are, of course, perfect games. I don't think there's anything I could do to improve on them. And then I could play them like every year if it came to that. Next is excellent. These are also top tier games, but maybe there's one kind of fatal flaw. Next is great but flawed. These are also games that I love, but they have some major weaknesses. Next is fine. These are okay games. They're not embarrassing. But actually the ones on here I have played but I've never finished because they didn't really motivate me to want to finish them. And then last we have games that I never want to play again, which I really did not enjoy. Maybe you can already guess what one of them is. And then the last is did not play, so I can't really say anything about them, but I'll probably say stuff about them anyway. But first let's start with didn't play. Didn't play 8. So let's put that there. I didn't play the online ones. Let's see, 14. I didn't play most of the sequels, so we'll put 4 and then 13 LR. I don't even know what that is. Let's see, 13. I did not play either. And then Revenant Wings did not play. So those are the ones that I have not played, no opinions on them. Although, if you saw my 7 video, you know I was kind of biased against Final Fantasy once it moved from Nintendo to Sony. And I might as well get that out of the way now, but 7, we'll put that in never want to play again. But I had low expectations for 7, and then when I did get around to playing it, it was kind of even lower than that. And then, because I had such a bad impression of 7, I never picked up 8. It was also due to the fact that I never had a PlayStation. A lot of people do like it, and people do say that it has the best romance of any of the Final Fantasies, so it might be worth playing someday. But Final Fantasy VII, you can certainly watch the other video. I go into great detail about what I did not like there. But the remake looks very good, and if I played it, I could maybe even put it in maybe excellent here. Chances are, though, I'm not going to play it just because I don't have a PlayStation, and then I don't have any plans on picking one up. But otherwise, I guess we could just go randomly here. Let's start here, Final Fantasy II. I'm also going to put that in never want to play again. It's a really important game in some ways. It introduces like chocobos and Cid and other very important Final Fantasy tropes. But the way that it played, I did not like. The main thing was the leveling system. I think the more that you use, certain weapons or spells or whatever, the higher the levels go for those equipment. And I didn't like that at all, so I couldn't get very far into the game. I think of all of the games here, after Final Fantasy VII, 2 is the one that needs the remake the most. I don't know if they could do it, because it's pretty simple. It doesn't have too much of a story, but yeah, it could benefit from that, I think. Next, let's look at Final Fantasy XV. I'm going to put that in fine. I did play it, and I did enjoy it, but I never finished it. I think some people were sort of off-put by the main team being 4 guys, like it was a boy band. But that didn't really bother me, and I actually did end up liking all of the 4 characters and the way they interacted with each other. The battle was not super interesting for me. It felt a little bit too loose and kind of out of control. And then the game is very large, which is kind of a double-edged sword. You can get lost in the game, or you could just kind of be overwhelmed by it. Maybe I was overwhelmed in the end. One of my favorite things to do, though, was just to set the car on autopilot and just drive around. I don't know why that was so satisfying, but I really did like that. Next, I guess we'll do another one that is fine, and that is Final Fantasy III. This one, too, I played, but did not finish. But I think this one might have even more potential than 15, because it has a job system. It's the first Final Fantasy with a job system, so you can assign different roles to your different teammates. And it has a little bit more story than like 1 and 2. And it has a nice remake as well, like for DS or PSP. So chances are good that I would replay this someday, just to see it all the way through, try out the job system. Well, I guess we'll just work our way up from the bottom here. Next up, I guess we'll do Final Fantasy V. We'll put that in great but flawed. I think the timing of when you played this game really affected how you like the game. For me, growing up in America, I played 2 and 3 on the Super Nintendo, which were 4 and 6. Those are the two works that kind of sandwiched this game. And then years later, I played 5 on emulator, I think it was. I think if you play them in that order, you don't like 5 as much as the others. But if you talk to Japanese people who played 5 in real time between 4 and 5, they love the game. And for a lot of Japanese people, it's their favorite Final Fantasy. For me, the characters and like the story and then the world, they're not as compelling as 4 or 6, and that's where it suffers. Where it's really great, though, is that it also has the job system, which is more sophisticated than 3, I would say. And then this job system, it was put together by Ito Hiroyuki, who's kind of a legendary guy in Square. He does a lot of the mechanical stuff, so he also designed the ATB gauge for Final Fantasy IV. He worked on Final Fantasy Tactics as well, that kind of world system and job system. So really good mechanics in 5. And this one I have played through a few times, but I would like to play through it again. The job system does give you lots of replayability, but also I want to, kind of revisit the story and characters. Maybe there's something there that I missed. Okay, next up, let's talk about Final Fantasy X. This one I never want to play again. And actually, I have never finished this one. This is another case where I think this game is overhyped, or like it has a lot of love that it's not particularly deserved, for the same reasons as 7. For 7, it's a lot of people's first, because the PlayStation 1 sold a bunch of units, people had never played a Final Fantasy, or they'd never played a role-playing game, or they had never played a video game even. And I think for 10, there are a lot of people in that same camp. A lot of first-time gamers, they bought a PlayStation 2. I think maybe PlayStation 2 is still the best-selling game console in the universe. I'll have to check on that. But for them, 10, similarly, might be their first Final Fantasy, their first RPG, maybe their first video game. So there's a lot of love there. It also has a very romantic story, just like 8, so that could also maybe appeal to people. But for me, I don't remember a thing about the leveling system or the battle system, so that's not a good sign. And then I didn't like any of the characters either. Tita was not a very interesting, he was kind of an annoying main character actually, and then Yuna I felt was also sort of two-dimensional, so I couldn't really grasp onto anything there. And also the look of the world really bothered me. Like it looked really like fantastical, but like they put a lot of effort into making it look fantastical with no kind of basis in anything. And if you go too far with design, it just doesn't work. I like design that's kind of grounded and sort of references something. And so like even Final Fantasy VII, you could say it has a very strong kind of design language within the game. You can tell that it's from a certain time and there's like culture and stuff. But 10, it's just wild. It's just wild. Colors and, extraneous like things on people's costumes and like buildings and stuff. And then also it had a pretty strong sort of a Star Wars prequel vibe to it as well, which I don't like at all. So 10, unfortunately, never got to finish. I just couldn't stand the game. And then that brings me to Final Fantasy X-2, which I'm going to put here. A lot of the same complaints are here with 10-2 as with 10. Don't like the world. I didn't like the music either. Final Fantasy X was the first game without Uematsu Nobuo. And I didn't like the characters, and then the story and the tone also didn't like. But the job system is so good in this game that I would play it again just for that. I think it might have the best job system of any of these Final Fantasy games as well. So as you can tell, I'm a big fan of this system, and that also helps me to enjoy War of the Visions as well. But yeah, of all of the games on this list, Final Fantasy X-2 might be my top recommendation for people that have never played it, or maybe people that have given up on it too early. Really, really compelling gameplay. And then Pine, the one on the right here with the big sword, one of my favorite characters in any Final Fantasy as well. Okay, so we're at the last 5 games, and then they are all going to enter these top 2 tiers. So let's see what we put in there. The first one is Final Fantasy IX. We're going to put that in excellent. I love this game. It has one of the best soundtracks, maybe top 3 soundtracks of any Final Fantasy. This did indeed come out on PlayStation, and I was biased against all of the PlayStation games. But some years later I bought a PlayStation 2, and then I went back and I played some older games. And then 9 really appealed to me because the aim of it was to kind of get back to the roots of Final Fantasy, which I was really happy about. And it got a lot of things right. It went back to like characters with defined roles. So like this character has this attack, that character has that healing magic or whatever. So there's more interest in team building within that game until you get to the very end of the game, and then everybody has a healing thing, everybody has an ultimate damage thing. So at that point it doesn't matter, but as you progress through the game, it's still interesting. But also the tone, it was more kind of like humorous, but also kind of fantasy-based, more than 7 and 8. I liked the world, I liked the leveling and then the equipment system, like learning abilities from items as you get them. And then Zidane, he's kind of one of my more favorite heroes. He has sort of like stereotypical, like, you know, happy-go-lucky, I want to help you sort of attitude. But he's got like a past, and he's got secrets, and then like the actions and decisions that he makes during the course of the game, they actually affect other people and the world around him, so I do like Zidane. I think the one thing that I would change about Final Fantasy IX is the kind of the design decision to give everybody really big heads and then small bodies. I think this was a conscious like nod to the very early Final Fantasies when you had those like sprites that had to be the size of like a perfect square, and so their heads were big and their bodies were small. It works when you're working in like 8-bit or 16-bit graphics, but when you have like, you know, photorealistic stuff, it doesn't work at all. It just looks strange. So I wish they had done the regular proportions for those characters. Later in like Dissidia and stuff, they give it normal proportions for Zidane in particular, and that really works. That's much better, I would say. Okay, next, and this might be the most controversial thing, but Final Fantasy VI I'm going to put in excellent, not perfect. To be honest, I would say Final Fantasy VI is my favorite game of all of these on here, but it's not perfect. And the one thing that's not perfect about it is that it's not difficult enough. I do like a little bit of difficulty in my games, and so in that sense, 5 and 10-2 and maybe even 3 are more difficult than 6. And I've actually gone back and I've done challenge runs just to make the game more challenging. So one time, for example, I did no equipping of Magicite, so no Espers, no learning magic. And so I really had to rely like on Edgar's tools or Cyan's Sword Tech, or Gao's Rage. And that really changed the game, but still, it wasn't that difficult. But if you've never done that before, I can recommend it. Some like funky characters become much more useful and powerful, like Strago and Gao, just because they have access to magic that you wouldn't otherwise. But I love 6 so much. Many characters, and they're all kind of the main character. They're all written really well. I love the world. I love the music. The music, it's also top 3 for me. One of the best bad guys of all time, Kefka. He's scary and memorable, and you don't like him, but you kind of do anyway. He's great. There is the Game Boy Advance version of Final Fantasy VI, and it has like end-game high difficulty content. So I could, do that in order to get difficulty out of the game. But by that point, like the story is kind of over, and I would like more like kind of difficulty ramp up during the actual game itself. So yeah, it's close, but not perfect. And that leads me to my last 3 games, and these are all perfect, so we'll just reveal them all at once. Okay, so Final Fantasy XII as a perfect game. That might be another controversial decision. And I'm going to make another video leading up to the release of War of the Visions, but I'm a fan of the Ogre Battle series, way back when Enix was its own company on the Super Nintendo. And I've been following all those games, and then like Matsuno and Yoshida, those creators, as they have like changed companies, changed platforms. And then Final Fantasy XII is kind of their penultimate game. It's sort of like their realization of all of the work that they had done up until then. But it takes place in Ivalice, which was first introduced to us in Final Fantasy Tactics. But it's a more modern vibe. But whereas Final Fantasy X, the design was just kind of crazy and all over the place, Final Fantasy XII, it's much more rooted in sort of like a Mediterranean, Northern Africa sort of a look, which was new for the series and which I really liked. And it was very consistent and sort of believable across like architecture and also the costumes of the characters. So for the look of the world, I really liked it. I also really like the story. It might be one of my favorite stories of any of the Final Fantasies. And it's much more similar to a ogre or a tactics story than all of the others. It's more political, it's more adult, it's more difficult to follow if you're not paying attention. So yeah, I do like that 12 for the story as well. Also, I like the battle system. It's kind of, it's hit or miss among players. But it's kind of auto battle, but you can like program your guys with different like if-then statements so that they act in certain ways during battle. And that was fun for me. And so like if your preparation is good enough with that programming, then you can get a very efficient sort of a battle result from your characters without you even have to do anything in-game. And it's weird, it's funny, because it's kind of a precursor to War of the Visions there as well. And then especially when War of the Visions gets that update where you can do an on-off switch on certain abilities, that'll make it even more similar to the battle system of Final Fantasy XII. And then looking at the Final Fantasy VII Remake, there will be a classic mode. That is also going to be kind of similar to the battle mode in 12. Where it's just like auto battle, but once they fill the ATB gauge, then you can do things like use items or cast magic or whatever. So yeah, it's kind of an influential battle mode, and this also was designed by Ito Hiroyuki, who I mentioned earlier. But just to keep talking about Final Fantasy XII, I really like 4 of the main characters. Bosch and Ash, I love them. Bosch is really interesting because like he's a very noble guy, but he suffers from like a case of like mistaken identity, and he's called a traitor and he's on the run. And then Ash, she's the princess whose husband and then also kingdom's taken from her, and so she's working to try to get that back. And then her character goes through kind of a character arc. In the beginning, she wants power in order to get back, what she wants. But as the game progresses and she, talks to people and grows and learns, then she realizes that, power is not what she really wants. I also like Balthier and Fran. They kind of, they're almost tipping over into more style over substance, but they're so charming, and they fit into the story well enough that they really work. And they're kind of iconic, sort of, if you look at the overall world of Final Fantasy characters. And I think Balthier in particular is very popular. It's also cool to get a male character with short hair for once. Van and Penelo, unfortunately, I think they're such boring characters, and they really disappear during the story. In the very beginning of the story of Final Fantasy XII, the focus is on them, but once you get like nations moving on each other and like political backstabbings and this kind of thing, they really disappear. So they're kind of worthless. But yeah, Final Fantasy XII. After Final Fantasy X-2, this will be my second highest recommendation for a game if you haven't played it or if you gave up on it early in the playthrough. Okay, next that brings me to Final Fantasy IV. And this one I love so much. It has everything that I want from a Final Fantasy game. Great music, graphics that are really enjoyable, story, characters, but also challenge, which is where it has Final Fantasy VI beat. But there are so many iconic characters and moments, like the time when Edward, he's like sick in bed, but he like stumbles out of bed to grab his harp so he can play it and then weaken the Dark Elf King. That's so cool. And Edward, he's one of my favorite characters in any Final Fantasy. I remember the first time that I used him in battle, and I used the hide command, and he ran off screen. That was so funny to me as a kid that I was laughing out loud. But also, like when Palom and Param, they sacrifice themselves to save your party. It's kind of a deep game, actually, like emotionally. Oh, and then the relationship between Kyne and Rosa and Cecil. I feel so bad for Kyne. He's such a tragic character. And then at the end, like, he doesn't even need to be that hard on himself, but it's just the type of guy that he is, that he's so racked with guilt, that he makes that decision at the end of the game. It's too much. And really good bad guys in this game as well. You have the four sort of like remixed fiends, which you saw earlier in Final Fantasy I, and then Golbez is really cool as well, and then like Cal Cabrera, lots of iconic bosses. So yeah, there's so much to like about this game, and this one I could play every year. This one also has a Game Boy Advance version, which has some nice features, like you can mix up your team at the end of the game. That's really cool. And then also some high difficulty content where you take like characters solo as well, which is interesting. So I can recommend that as well. And then that brings me to Final Fantasy I, which is still one of my favorite Final Fantasies. But this is very much tied to my youth. And actually I kind of played it at the same time that I played Dragon Warrior 1. Or Dragon Quest, as it's known in Japan. Dragon Warrior was cool and like very influential on my life, but Final Fantasy I think left a deeper impact on me because the world kind of felt like colder and like bigger and like more dangerous. And the world of 1, it kind of reminds me of the world of Lord of the Rings when I read those books when I was very young. Kind of a similar thing, very big and cold and dangerous. But, the music here is so iconic, and then like the ability to choose your team at the beginning, that adds a surprising amount of replayability. Very high challenge factor, I would say. And then lots of iconic bosses and weapons and things. And yeah, my love for Final Fantasy I, it really informs my love for all of these other games. If I had never played it, I probably would have come around to the series eventually, probably Final Fantasy IV for the Super Nintendo. but I wonder if my love would be as deep if I had never played 1 as it came out in real time. But yeah, I remember playing this with my brother, and then we would actually play the beginning over and over. We would fight Garland, we'd fight the pirates, and then we'd save up a bunch of gold to buy the silver sword, and then play like the swamp dungeon and the dark elf. And then around Dark Elf, we'd reset the game and just play it from the beginning, just because the beginning of it was so fun, try out different teams and stuff. And then, at the very end, I will add Final Fantasy Tactics. It's actually not an option on this tier maker, but I'm going to put it up there in Perfect as well. And then just today, somebody left a comment on one of my videos that they were hoping for Final Fantasy Tactics Remaster in the same vein as Final Fantasy VII. But I think Final Fantasy Tactics is never going to get one, because it's already perfect and you can't improve it. I think you could improve the graphics, you know, just make them like cleaner, more sharp, but you wouldn't want to change the music. You certainly couldn't change the game mechanics at all, not battle, not leveling, because that really makes the game. But yeah, same team made Final Fantasy Tactics, as did Final Fantasy XII, and then Ogre Battle and those old games. So really good sense of like world and time and place, and the characters match. And then the story is also more adult and more political than most of the Final Fantasies. So yeah, Final Fantasy Tactics, another perfect game. I could see myself playing that again very soon. Okay, but those are my thoughts on a tier list of all of the Final Fantasies. Hope that was interesting. And then, of course, I'd love to hear about which Final Fantasies you like. You can leave those in the comments. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again. Take care.